If you've been to any of our meetings, you're familiar with me. I'm David Spakes with Science Cafes are cool shirt on. I've worn that in the in-person meetings. I just wanted to be familiar with that. At our meeting today, we are talking about the Hellbender and the conservation efforts of the NRCS, and we just want to show our appreciation for Jeronimo Silva. He's going to be our main speaker this evening, and I think Todd Reed is also going to talk some about the NRCS and their work with the Hellbenders. So Jeronimo, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you there.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate the introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you guys today. I appreciate the opportunity. I think that platforms like these are extremely important to just spread the word about conservation. We live and die by partnerships, and especially in the environmental field and conservation field. I mean, we really need to get with our work together with folks in different agencies to be able to tackle such complex problems. So I appreciate this opportunity. Todd is also here, so I work a lot with Todd. He's at people are coming in slowly, but Todd works at NRCS, and I'll let him introduce himself. But I'm a partner biologist with NRCS, so I technically work for Virginia Tech's Conservation Management Institute, and I'm a private lands biologist for NRCS, and also the coordinator for the Southeastern Hellbender Conservation Initiative. Todd, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Todd Reed, and I'm the Area Resource Conservationist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I work out of the Area Office, which is located in Knoxville, and we cover, our area covers the 26 counties here in East Tennessee, basically from Campbell County, Anderson, Roane, Loudoun, Meigs County, Bradley County, Polk, all the way east up to Johnson County. And I'm the programmatic area resource conservationist, so I work with all of our field employees, making sure we're doing our contracts and things like that correct, and helping them help landowners get conservation put on the ground, working with good partners on applying for different grants and other federal monies to help get some extra cost share funds to go out to participants to install conservation practices to help different T&E species, including hellbenders. And I'll be available for questions and anything like that when it comes around to the programmatic part and stuff like that with NRCS.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. And again, thank you guys for being here today with us and for the opportunity to share some of those materials. So, we're trying, everything's virtual now. We're going to try to do our best to make things go smoothly. So what I'm going to try to do right now is play a couple videos, a couple of YouTube videos to you guys, and we'll play maybe 30 seconds or 40 seconds. And I would like your feedback to let me know if you are able to see the video and hear the video well. And if you are, then we'll continue to watch the video. If not, I have posted 2 links in the chat box where you can actually go and watch the video on your own computer, because then you don't have to exit the meeting or anything like that. You can just click the video, watch the videos, and then we can return in about 10 minutes. But let's try to play the video through my computer and see if it works. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. All right. So I'll play about, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
I can.
So I'll play about 30 seconds of this and get back to you guys and make sure everything's working.
Is there audio with the video?
I think it might be muted.
There's no audio, Geronimo.
Wow, that's a big hellbender. Whew.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to watch it on our own links.
I agree.
Yeah, Kathy's talking, but nothing's coming.
Sorry, so no.
I think it's just a speed problem. I heard a little bit of chatter there for a second.
Okay.
I think it's just really slow.
Toward the end, I heard something.
Maybe try it again.
Yeah, let me give me 1 second here. All right, let me make sure that.
A lot of different stresses in our environment. We know that when those stresses really pile up, it can compromise our health. I'm interested in how animals deal with a number of different stresses.
How much blood you got?
700.
Can you guys hear it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start it over.
Itchy, but yeah.
All right. So,
Hey, it might help if everyone turns off their own video. If you go up there and just switch off your video, it might help.
while we're watching the videos, be sure and think of some really good questions to ask for the Q&A part later.
All right, here we go.
The first time that I laid eyes on a hellbender, I was blown away that an animal so large could be living right beneath our feet, and most people have no idea of its presence. There's just a sense of awe that you're kind of looking at this living dinosaur, in a sense, that tells a story of what has been happening in the stream for the last 10 or 15 or 50 years. And I'm broadly interested in how these animals that live their entire lives in streams handle a range of different disturbances on the landscape and in the water. So just like you and I have to deal with a lot of different stresses in our environment, we know that when those stresses really pile up, it can compromise our health. I'm interested in how aquatic animals deal with a number of different stresses.
How much blood you got?
700. At this site, I've actually augmented some artificial nest chambers in the river. So these are meant to mimic natural nest sites that hellbenders would use. This is the time of year when hellbenders start breeding. Males will go into a nest cavity and guard a clutch of eggs. Once the females lay them, they fertilize them, and then the female leaves. The male stays with them for months, up to 8 months. And so today we're going out to check these artificial chambers to see if any males have come into the boxes, and we'll process any nests that we find. And we'll also just capture any hellbender using the box for day-to-day use. And we'll take a blood sample and mark and measure and weigh it, and then release it right back in the box where we found it. Hellbenders are perfectly designed to live in the bottom of a stream, a really fast flowing stream. They're flattened so that they can handle a really swift current moving right over the top of them and still crawl along the bottom. One of the things people notice is the roughly kind of lateral folds along the side of their body. They've gotten a great nickname, old lasagna sides, from those. And those folds basically function to increase surface area over their body. And their skin, if you were to look at it through a microscope, you'd see it's packed full of blood vessels that are able to absorb oxygen out of the water and help the hellbender breathe. So they breathe primarily through their skin, but they do have some lungs that they can use in really in conditions where there isn't enough oxygen in the water. And they also, one of the neatest features you don't get to see on hellbenders until you're really up close are their toes. They have these tough little keratinized toe tips that really help them grip onto the bottom and move. And they're pink and they stand out as just really a unique characteristic. One of my favorite parts of the hellbender. They live over 25 years in the wild, and they eat primarily crayfish is the major part of their diet. They are virtually harmless to humans. So I've handled hundreds of these animals. I've never had, a dangerous encounter or one try to bite. And they show a lot of site fidelity or attachment, as we think of it, to specific parts of streams. So if I go out and find a hellbender in this section of stream today, if I come back in 5 or 10 years, there's a really good chance I'll find the animal in the same general vicinity. For children of tomorrow not to be able to go out and see a hellbender is a sad thought for me.
All right, so that's the first video. Was everyone able to see it and hear it well?
Yes.
Yeah, really good.
Yes.
Great. So here I'm going to play the, so this is some research done, a little background. When I started working with hellbenders in 2014 up in Virginia, this was a PhD student doing her work at Virginia Tech on hellbender reproduction and landscape impacts on basically hellbender ecology. So I'll show you a second video now. It's a little longer. It's about 6 minutes long, and it's with the crew doing work at Tennessee State University, and they were looking at translocation between different hellbender areas as a means of conservation strategy. And here we go. All right. That was it. Those were the 2 videos that I wanted to share with you guys. So I guess let's jump right into questions.
So what is the trend line for their population right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me pull up a basically what we're looking like for their what it looks like for their status. So basically the whole population is declining. That's what most of the population. So let me go back a little bit. The range of the hellbender goes all the way from New York all the way to northern Alabama and west to Arkansas and Missouri. So there's 2 subspecies. There's the eastern hellbender and the Ozark hellbender. And the Ozark hellbender is located right here in the Ozark Mountains. And the eastern hellbender basically goes all the way from the Ozark Mountains all the way through the southeast here up to New York. Throughout all these 15 states, the population is basically declining for the past 30 to 40 years when we actually started really studying these species. So here's a kind of outdated map, but that's from 1998, and basically it gives an idea of what the range used to be like. So the original gray range, and what it basically where the hellbender, the good populations and healthy populations are located now, which is basically in this pocket here where we are in Tennessee and Western North Carolina. I even wonder how they are doing in Georgia. So here are some numbers. So historically, that's from the last species status assessment done by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So historically, there were about 570 known healthy eastern hellbender populations across 15 states, and currently about 40% of those are extirpated or functionally extirpated. And when we say functionally extirpated, we are talking about the fact that we're not able to locate any young. So when we actually conduct field surveys, we're not able to find any juveniles, which means that the populations are actually not reproducing. 345 of those still exist in the wild, but only 36% of that are considered healthy populations, and 64% of those are declining. So you got, from historical numbers, you got 60% of the populations that still exist, but more than half of those populations are declining. And the distribution, basically, the healthy populations are found here in eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, northern Georgia, somewhat. And populations are predicted to keep declining for the next 25 years. And within our Tennessee River drainage, about 40 healthy populations are predicted to remain. So they're, they're not doing very good. And that's why conservation efforts like ours exist. Let me see if I have.
How many specimens make a healthy population?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
How many specimens make a healthy population?
That's a really good question. That's the question that we have meetings all the time to actually discuss what would make a healthy populations. Now, I forgot how the Fish and Wildlife Service determines a healthy population, but when we are looking at a healthy population, we want to see basically a normal distribution of animal sizes. So a healthy population, when we talk about healthy populations, that's what we want to see. A certain number of very large adult animals that have been around for a really long time, but also a large number of subadults and somewhere in between, and having that transition, but especially a really good a good number of larvae to actually show that those populations are actually recruiting, those populations are breeding, and that the habitat actually provides enough area for all age classes. So that's what we consider a healthy population. And I mean, by we, I say the research community, right? The biologists that are working with hellbenders.
How do they survive cold winters?
So usually these animals are cold-blooded. So in really cold streams, their metabolism just really, really goes down, and they just hang out under rocks and just eat less, and they just wait until the winter passes. The advantage is that since they are fully aquatic, even if the water surface freezes a little, just from really low temperatures, the subsurface, it's still flowing. So in a lot of these rivers, what we see is that you have a little thin layer of ice, but the river under the ice is still flowing. And when you're discussing oxygen levels, the colder the water, the higher the oxygen level. So for them, actually, it's not a problem to have that thin layer of ice, because they still have flowing water, they still have high levels of oxygen, they still have their food. So they just hang out and wait until the winter passes.
So, now there is a fairly wild river just to the north of the Hiwassee, the Conasauga. I think it's just to the north.
South. That's the Georgia code, comes into Tennessee and goes back.
Yeah, these rivers run backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
But so have y'all done any research on the Conasauga?
Yeah, so funny enough, we have done multiple surveys, and in general between different labs and different universities. There are a lot of surveys has been done in the Conasauga, but they're not there, which we don't really understand why, because they're in the Mobile Basin, which is the basin right next to the Conasauga in Georgia. I think I'm getting the basins correct. But they're not in the Conasauga. And when you visit the Conasauga, especially in the area where it comes into the Cherokee National Forest, the habitat's phenomenal. And there's a lot of other threatened and endangered fish species in the area, but for some reason, hellbenders are not there. And we don't know if it's due to some historical separation, or we don't really know why they're not there. But yeah, the Conasauga looks really good.
What is the basis for determining what their historical habitat was?
That's a really good question. That is, if I had candy, I would give that to you, because let me pull up a picture of a habitat here. But that gets really we have a lots of arguments about this, because it's easy for us to usually look at a river and say, oh my goodness, So here's a good example of, you know, what a habitat would look like. So it's really easy for us to look at a habitat and say, oh my goodness, this is great hellbender habitat. Hellbenders had to be here. But that's not necessarily true. We didn't really start learning about these animals and being on the ground until the 1970s. Before that, we have interacted with hellbenders, but it was more from an exploitative perspective where we, you know, sold them pet trade and ate them and whatnot. So we didn't really start studying these animals until the 1970s. And there's so much changes that have taken place in stream systems over the past century that it's really hard for us to say this is exactly what a hellbender habitat used to look like in prehistoric area or prior to settlers, or it's really hard for us to say, you know, for us to determine where these animals used to be historically. So the only thing we can really use is the data that we have taken since the 1970s and go from there. So that's what our historic data is. There are some natural history notes from the late 1800s when they first start writing about hellbenders, and we can use those as well. But that's basically as far back as our records go. So that's the only thing we have to use. The only thing we have to base our decisions on is where have they been in the last 100 years.
So living in water, whatever evidence of their presence there would have been washed away probably. And so that's why I was going to ask if there's any physical evidence that remains from their presence. It sounds like what you're saying is basically it's the notes taken by naturalists.
Exactly. We wouldn't be able to know if they have been there or not if without any notes. So like, for example, they're very cryptic. They live under rocks. So basically this is a picture of a Dan master. So usually when they lay the eggs, the female will leave the nest and the male will sit and take care of the young for 8 months until they leave the nest. And they're called Dan masters. But these animals will hide under rock, and basically you can't find them unless you do what you saw in the video where you get a team, you get PVs, you lift the rocks and actually find them. So, and you know, if we want to go into talking about where they have been historically, we can look at, I want to share this with you guys because I think this is really interesting. And he goes a little bit back into, you know, it goes into the threats basically to hellbender. But since you asked that question, I want to share these news articles with you guys because I think they're amazing. So here are some new articles from 1850 to about 1899. And I need to read this one to you guys. The hellbender, you know, is neither fish, flesh, nor fowl. It lives in the mud at the bottom of the Allegheny River in some of its tributaries during the winter. And it has to be mined like coal. In the summer, it either swims or crawls about in the streams and even walks out and lies in the shade along the banks. It eats crawfish in the toes of courageous people who go into that Allegheny to bathe. And some folks along the river declare that it possesses a deadly venom. It gets better. One noted Allegheny River fisherman told me once that he knew that to be a fact because he speared one in the head once, and it reached its head around and sank its fang in the wooden spear handle. In a few seconds, the spear handle began to swell, and it kept on swelling until he got as big as the fisherman's arm, and then he burst into 100 pieces.
Oh my goodness!
So you can see how there is. First of all, they don't have fangs, or they're not venomous either. But you can see how there's a lot of. Those are the records that we have to work from. There's a lot of folklore around it, and basically back in the 1850s, they used to kill them, eat them. If you fast forward a little bit, in the early 1900s, in the 1930s. You still get reports of basically them being eaten, and there's a lot of bad connotation to the name Hellbender. But then they start talking a little bit about protection and what we can do with the Hellbenders and why they're important. And then in between the 1930s and the 1960s, that's basically when you look at Hellbenders as game species. So a lot of people used to actually go Hellbender gigging and catch them for whatever purposes they wanted to catch them for. And it wasn't until basically the 1970s up to now where we actually really started looking into these animals. But you can see how the data that we have is really only 200 years old. So sometimes it's very difficult to say, you know, for sure where these animals were before we start keeping record. And here's the last one where basically we consider ourselves to be more into the conservation biology era, where we recognize the importance of these animals.
Is there any anecdotal evidence available in like the Native American record at all?
So there were, I don't have a copy of that right now, but I read something about the European settlers that they had written on their natural, on their journal, talking about how the natives used to eat them and use them for spiritual rituals. And and I think that's one of the oldest records of Hellbenders that we have, and they are usually from this area. But again, they used to go all the way to New York. So,
Jeronimo, we're getting a lot of questions coming in through the chat screen. Why don't you take a moment and answer some of those?
All right. So, how do you get involved with the Southeastern Hellbender Conservation Initiative? That's a great question, and let me answer that in a little bit because that goes more into our work with NRCS and what we are currently doing. So let me hold that for a second. Jennifer's question, what is the closest relative to the Hellbender? That is a really good question. So the Hellbender is in the family Cryptobranchus, which is the giant salamander family. And in North America, you have the Eastern Hellbender and the Ozark Hellbender under the Cryptobranchus allegheniensis genus. Now, the closest relatives to Hellbenders would be the Chinese and Japanese giant salamanders. So actually, in North America, we don't have anything that's closely related to Hellbenders. All their close related species are out in China and Japan, which helps us when we're doing a lot of genetics work with them. They can't really match anything else in the United States, which is really neat. Now, do you know if anyone is using eDNA to analyze habitat for presence of Hellbenders? Yes, we are. That's actually what I did for my master's at Tennessee State University, and I'll share with you the map of what we have. So for you guys that are not familiar with environmental or eDNA, which actually stands for environmental DNA, that's basically that's basically DNA that floats in the water column. And through PCR and other extraction processes and lab work, we can actually extract DNA from the water. And we don't have to go in, we don't have to lift any rocks or do anything. We can actually collect a liter of water and take it to the lab and extract DNA from that liter of water. And we can actually have a presence and absence result from that DNA sample. So you guys saw in the video how hard it is to actually get in the water and look for these animals. Now with eDNA by myself, and I was able, and I had a lot of people help me with field work, but technically with a few number of people, I was able to sample over 200 places in Tennessee and actually get within, I think, 65% accuracy, counting the field accuracy and the lab accuracy. We're able, with a 65% confidence level, determine if animals there or not. So here's a map of what we're looking at. So every single triangle is a eDNA sample site that I collected in Tennessee. All the green ones are the ones where we got positives. All the red ones are the ones where we got negatives. Now, the really neat part about this map is that I have also done a watershed development analysis on these HUC-12 watersheds, so the smallest unit of watershed we can have. And basically, the clear watersheds are watersheds that are up to 15% developed when you're looking at urban and agricultural development. And then when you keep going up, the scales are here on the bottom right, but the really dark, the black watersheds are watersheds that are between 50% to 99% to 92% developed for either urban and agriculture together. And you can really see a trend that here in the Blue Ridge, where you don't have much watershed development, you actually have a lot of healthy populations that are still sticking around. Well, I know they're healthy because I worked with them, but you still have a lot of positive eDNAs. And when you start to develop the watersheds and see a higher watershed development level, then you start to see these populations disappear, right? You start to see a lot of negatives. But anyway, that was to answer the question that we have used eDNA to look into Hellbender distribution. Okay. Is it illegal to capture, kill them? How can there be only two species while located in the how can there be only two species while located in widely dispersed, unconnected streams? How well do they do around the paper plants, such as one in Calhoun, Tennessee? Those are great questions. Yes. Well, the Ozark subspecies is federally protected. So it is actually illegal to handle them, to move rocks, to basically do anything that would be considered harassment to wildlife. The eastern Hellbender is also federally protected in Missouri. Just got listed in Missouri, so that followed those I don't remember the technical term, but it follows the same rules for them, right, as a sub-listing. But the eastern Hellbender here in Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, they're not federally protected, but they are considered endangered species in the state. So yes, it is still illegal to capture and kill them. How can there be only two species? Since they're widely dispersed, that's a very good question. It goes into somewhat of their evolutionary biology. And some studies actually say that there are not well, technically they are subspecies, but let me see if I can pull this up to you guys. There's a really cool study done by Paul Heim at University of Kentucky. And or Kentucky University. I'm not really sure. I'm not good with names, but basically he did his PhD over 7 years, and he suggests that there are actually different subspecies. And here it is. So here's the suggested map by Paul, is that each one of these different colors are technically a subspecies that when you look at river drainage and catchment, it kind of relates to that, right? So that's really a good question. We believe that there are two subspecies, but now there's a lot of work done in genetics that basically suggests, like, look, these animals may be actually all different subspecies around this entire range because the range is so dispersed. And how well do they do around paper plants? That's a really good question. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know that, and I don't know that people have actually done research looking specifically at the impact of paper plants, so I can't provide any facts or back up with scientific data. But there are reports, and we have seen it across, just by observation, we have seen it across different states where the populations are declining, or they have been extirpated below areas where you have intense landscape use, that being paper mills or mulching plants, or, you know, all those things. Again, I'm not saying that those are horrible. I'm just saying that those are observations from researchers that those populations necessarily don't do very, very well.
But these animals exist only in fairly small, free-flowing streams, right?
Well, they can.
Are they in the Tennessee River? Are they in the Mississippi? Well, not the Mississippi, but
yeah, they can go up to larger rivers. So the Tennessee, for example, is a larger river. In Arkansas, it's the 11-Point River. The 11-Point River, we actually have to, and I have a picture of that here as well. We actually have to get on boats and use scuba gear and actually go 15 feet down and snorkel and basically dive for these guys. So here's an example. On the bottom right, we are in a boat, and basically you gotta use scuba gear and go 15 feet down. And I mean, this river is pretty big, and especially during flood events, it gets pretty high. Another interesting thing, one of my colleagues in Cookeville that works for TRRA has found hellbenders at Cordell Hole. And what we think happens is that they somehow get washed in the Warren River, and they go into the reservoir, and they use maybe the banks as a breeding, not necessarily a breeding area, but as a habitat. So that's a good question. I think that, and also I've seen these animals in little streams that were 2 feet wide. So I think that there is, you know, we like to think that they're very selective and very particular about where they live, but they may be in other areas that we don't necessarily think of as optimal hellbender habitat, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
So I got another question here. What is the largest salamander in the world? The largest salamander in the world, man. There's hopefully no one hopefully I'm getting this right, but as far as I know, the largest salamanders in the world are I think it's the Chinese giant salamander. They are, you know, they get 3-4 feet, or it's either the Chinese or the Japanese giant salamander in weight. But then if you're talking about the Sicilians and other, there's discussion about how long they get, and maybe they can get longer than that. But the largest salamander in weight is definitely the one of the Asian salamanders. So what are the natural predators of eggs, youngs, and adult size here in Tennessee? That's a phenomenal question. So I'm going to show you pictures of their eggs. These eggs, when they are laying in the stream, they're basically balls of protein, right? So here's a picture of 2 hellbenders in a nest box, a female and a male, and these are eggs. So basically they have external fertilization, and the female lays the eggs, just like fish. The male deposits the sperm on the eggs, and then that's how they get fertilized. And then the female leaves, and then the male takes care of it. So that's eggs at 24 hours. These are pictures from the Nashville Zoo, where they have a captive breeding program. Here are 7 days. Here are 6 weeks. So these eggs, when they float around the river after a flood or something, everything eats them, basically. I mean, anything will eat them. They're just a snack floating downstream. The young is the same thing. They're great food for everything else. I mean, imagine these little salamanders. You see there's 1-year-old, it's 10 centimeters. So it's about that big. So they're great food for basically anything that lives in in the stream. Now, for the adults, otters, believe it or not, otters are just vicious predators. And that video that you guys saw where they're doing translocation studies, they actually lost, I think, was 4 or 8 animals, something like that, to otter predation. And they had a transmitter in them, and they would find the transmitter all the way up inland, and the Hellbender would be gone. And there's a picture taken at the Little River where the otter is sitting in the middle of the river with a Hellbender just snacking on it, just like a burrito. So I mean, otters are just phenomenal. And water snakes. There are 2 videos floating around of water snakes dragging Hellbenders across the channel and eating them. Are there reintroduction programs that take into account the subspecies? Yes. So there's some reintroduction programs being done by the Nashville Zoo and the St. Louis Zoo and other zoos, and Ohio University also works with reintroduction programs. And every time they do the reintroduction program, they actually collect eggs from a certain watershed in a certain river, and they actually raise that in captivity, and they release it back to the same watershed so that you're not mixing animals from different watersheds. So in Tennessee, folks that are working with that really try to be careful. If they're working in Duck River, they release back in the Duck River. If we are working in the Ocoee watershed, the animals are only being changed within the same watershed to basically avoid that. We don't really fully understand that, but we try to take that into account as much as we can. Are they very territorial? Yes. So they actually have really high site fidelity. There are reports of Hellbenders being found under the same rock for about 11 years. And they don't really move much. Their home range is about 150 meters. And they sometimes keep coming back to the same rock. They have really high site fidelity. And during the mating season, males actually have male to male combat, and they actually will fight each other and roll around like alligator roll and everything. So they are during the breeding season, they're very territorial. Oh, awesome. There's someone, Jennifer sent me a message here that they saw me at the Little River talking about the Hellbender. So that's great. I'm glad to see you again. Any other questions about the animals, or should we maybe talk a little bit more about the what we're doing? Oh yeah, I got to go back to the NRCS questions. Okay, what is the range of adult males and females? It's a really good question. I think I'm gonna try to remember off the top of my head, but I think males have something like a 300 meter home range, and the females have about 150 to 170. I want to say that those numbers are right. I don't know that off the top of my head. But if you would like, I can always share with you some research. Actually, one of the guys that you saw in the video as well, Brad Nissen, he's at Tennessee State University. He just finished his master's looking at Hellbender movement after translocation. So he has some really cool data on looking at where these animals go, how far they go, how far they migrate, and what the home range is for these animals. But I want to say it's around the 150 to the 300 meter range, and there's a little difference between males and females. Sorry, I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Hey, I've got to jump, but one last quick question, if you don't mind, and I'm sorry to.
Of course, no problem.
You. Why should we care?
Oh, that's I love that question. That's a phenomenal question. I think that there is part of that question has to do with just personal intrinsic values for each one of us. You know, we look at wildlife and we care about wildlife and our natural resources in different ways. So to some people, it has an intrinsic value. It has the idea that these animals have been around for 160 million years and now they're disappearing. So if they have been around for that long and now they're disappearing, what does that tell us about the quality of our water and the quality of our aquatic systems and the quality of our watershed? And rivers, in one way or another, they're the veins of your landscape. So basically, whatever you do in the landscape level ends up in your rivers. So what, from them disappearing, what is that telling you about the way that we're managing our landscapes and the way they're managing our land? And besides that, there's just the idea that an ecosystem is a lot more resilient to change and a lot more resilient to natural events and a lot more resilient to everything if they have a higher level of biodiversity. When you start to take biodiversity, you start to take species out of an ecosystem, you start to lose its functionality, you start to lose its resiliency, and you start to lose its ability to change. So if you want to be able to have functional ecosystems, I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, hellbenders are the main thing we should protect. They are above everything else. That's not the case, right? They're just big slobby salamanders that live under rocks. But they're also part of the biodiversity and how resilient that ecosystem is and how well they function. So it's more of the idea of the wholesome approach and how everything's connected and how everything's important.
Awesome. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I'll be in touch.
Good to meet you. Have a good one.
Sure. Bye.
Jeronimo, if Todd's going to mention anything about the conservation efforts of NRCS during the meeting, we probably better migrate over to
all right.
Questions about that.
Todd, yeah, take it from here.
Well, hey, I will. And Jeronimo, you got the slides and the pictures and everything.
Yeah,
so
give me one.
I'll maybe discuss that. But one of the things about why we care, and maybe transition into part of what we might be seeing next, I was going to ask Jeronimo to kind of talk with the group about soil erosion and sedimentation of the streams, and how does the soil erosion and sedimentation of the streams affect hellbenders.
Sorry, my wife turned on the dryer upstairs, and I can't really hear anything. So the perks of working from home, right? Okay, yeah, definitely. I can discuss that. So let me switch, and I'll promise I'll make it quick. So let's talk a little bit about erosion and what the problem is. So so one of the things. So here's what we see, Todd and I see all the time when we're actually working across Tennessee. So sedimentation is a big problem and usually comes from lack of best management practices. And cattle accessing the stream is an example of that, right? It's a free source of water, but there's a lot of different problems that come with cattle accessing the stream. Here's another example of what we're looking at. So they create a lot of erosion. They create stream bank failure, and all that sediment actually goes into the waterways and creates a lot of problems, not only for the wildlife, but for the channel morphology itself, for the amount of money that we actually spend to address water quality issues. Here's a video of a study that's taking place at University of Tennessee under Matt Gray's lab, where they're looking at the impact of sediment on larvae, hellbender larvae. This is what happens when sediment issues are large and we have eroding banks and a flood event comes through. That's a baby hellbender right here. So this is what happens from their perspective. Right? So you can imagine how after many years of erosion and soil being going into the stream, that can become a problem. Todd, do you want me to go more into it, or?
No, that's good. I was just wanting to kind of transition into a lot of what we do as NRCS and as an agency in respect of streams and that type of stuff. We're working with landowners to do best management practices and work with landowners on different federal programs to help provide funding for those landowners and participants to install conservation practices that help reduce sedimentation and soil erosion. So here, we've got a list of a lot of the different programs that are available. And in our state, one of the largest ones that we use is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. All landowners are eligible as long as they're got a highly erodible, following the HEL compliance regulations, and then also following the wetland type regulations, and they have a farm number and tract number. So we work with a lot of different participants, different situations and stuff. So there's different ways for someone to apply. The first step is to work, with their farm service agency. Each county has a farm service agency. Yeah, there's our steps to assistance. We've got field employees that'll meet with participants on the farm and walk over and evaluate the resource concerns and evaluate the things that are happening out there on the farm with the landowner, and then take the things that landowner is wanting to do to help their land and work on those natural resources that are there. We're a non-regulatory agency, so we're not coming out there and working with someone saying, hey, you've got to do this or you've got to do this. Everything that we offer is voluntary. And working with partners, like Jeronimo, and being able to, work with someone on their private land that they're wanting to help fix a problem, and then, providing them cost share to offset the cost for doing that project and fixing that problem. So there is a benefit to both that person individually and to the community at large for investing those funds and doing those projects. You can move on forward to the next slide, and we'll get, I think you've got just some quick, we've got a whole, go back to that last one there. We've got a whole list of different type of practices that we can do. And that's what's listed over here on the left with our practice code number. But, a lot of what we're looking at here with the Hellbenders is this stream and shoreline protection, riparian and buffer type practices, and then anything that happens on the landscape. If you've got a crop field, if we can do some cover crops and some no tillage practices and things like that to keep the sediment there on the ground and out of the waterways, and to help slow and reduce soil erosion and start building back up the health of the soil there and increasing the infiltration and all of that kind of good stuff, then we're keeping that sediment out of the waterways and on the ground where it needs to be. Jump on over, see what you had. We probably look at a lot of different before and afters. I mean, if you've been anywhere, you can see how, the lack of thick roots, and even if you have big trees and stuff, eventually a tree is going to fall. And, so streams naturally meander, and they naturally do that kind of thing. But, with the types of urbanization that we have and build up, we're increasing those flows, and with the lack of, good root vegetation along there, we're having it to where it can erode a lot quicker. And so there's kind of a typical before situation of a creek bank that's, sloughing off and falling down. You can see where the grass is down there. And, so that's been a recent kind of slump right there. But it might take, you can see the fence kind of hanging out in the middle of the creek there with all the debris. Yeah, right there with all the debris on it. So at one point, that was the natural bank line. And then over a period of maybe 5 years, 6 years or something, it's eaten back. And typically a landowner will approach our conservationists and say, hey, I'm worried about losing my land. What can I do? And so we'd work with them on different conservation practices to do that. And jump forward, we might have, I can't say for certain that this is the actual picture of that same spot. It might be, it might not be, but it's typical of one thing that we can do, which is a stream bank stabilization project. And, we would go in there and basically hard armor that area where that bend is at, so that we can kind of keep that there and stop it from eroding. And that's typically, go back one, that's typically one of the things that we use is the geotextile fabric, and put some heavy rock in a keyway there along the edge of it, and then have some rock along the backside there. Next picture. Go ahead. Yeah, and that's a larger project that was done, and that was a big bend, high flow creek, how that was done. And so these are pictures, right during construction, right after construction. But, I've been back to, and it might have been this exact spot, but I've been back to several spots in 10 years. You've got trees growing up through that. It looks natural. You've got a hard armor there, trees growing through it and everything. And so we're not losing that bank. And there's one right there. I think if you go back, that might have been go back one. Yeah, right there. And that's not the same farm, but it's typical. You've got where cows had been walking in, and you can see where the bank used to be, where that sycamore tree area there was. And so one of the things we can do is come in and fence the animals. That's what the next picture we're showing. Jump one more there. Yeah, you've got a fence. You can see where the fence is 20, 30 feet off the bank, and you just start letting it heal itself back up. I think that is the same picture.
It's the same, yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, and I think that might have been one of the ones that I had done back 10 years ago or so. So, just a matter of setting that fence back and then letting that area start growing and healing is a good practice. And some of the things that we found too is, when you've got those low slopes and gently sloped areas into the creek, you can do that setback and just let it grow. But when you've got a hard drop off like that right there, it's going to continue to eat away unless you do something a little bit more aggressive in stabilizing that toe to give the plants time to get grown. And there's a typical situation where they did a toe stabilization, which catches the majority of the high flow, and then we come back and let that bank above that rock start grassing in and planting some trees and things like that. And this is I'm pretty sure this is up in the Washington County area. So those creeks get pretty fast in flood conditions. And there's
some right there in buffer planting.
Yeah, that's where we're planting willow stakes in the bank after doing some practices. And you can see in this particular one, we've done some J hooks. You see the rocks right behind the people going out into the water. I think we might have some other pictures that show a little bit better of a J hook and a V weir maybe.
Well, I don't think I added those. I went to here talking about just, controlling soil.
Yeah, there's some soil erosion, before and after soil erosion type practices where you've got an area that's getting washed in, and we'd come back in, work with the landowner to, stabilize it, put in some checks, keep the sediment there on the ground and not let it get into waters. And jump to the next one there, see what we got. One of the other things we do, typical farmers, what I do, where I water my cows, as of now in Tennessee, it's not illegal for a participant, a landowner, you've got a creek on your farm, you can water your cows out of it. It's not illegal. So one of the things, that we do is we say, look, let us fence these animals out of here, and we'll provide you a water source out in the field away from this, so that you can better rotate your animals around and better utilize the pasture, and they won't have to walk to the creek to get water. You can have the water out in the middle of the pastures and move them around and let them graze a little bit better. So anyway, this is a before type picture of animals in the creek. And you can see the soil erosion, sediment and all of that, and it's not rained there. That's just typical erosion from animals just being down there in it. There's one of the water tanks that we were talking about. So we can work with landowners, that have those creeks like that. We'll fence the animals out of it and connect to a water source or drill a well if there's no water source available, and put in these different type of watering facilities. This is a freeze-proof water tank that has a heat well under it where the pipe's coming up to supply water. There's float valves in there, so when the cow drinks down a little bit, the float valve will drop just like a toilet tank, and then fills back up. And a little bit of a concrete area around the tank so that they don't push it and knock it over and break the pipe, and holds that tank there. And then you've got a little bit of gravel area where it's going to be heavily used, so that again we can keep that sediment there after several years of the cows coming there to drink at that particular place. And you can see we put it in a fence line so that promote, grazing rotationally to where they can graze that field that's in the background there. Concentrate the animals in that field until they graze the grass down to about a 4-inch level, then move them off of it and move them over to another field and let that 4-inch level grass grow back up to 8-9 inches before they move them back into that paddock again.
So Todd, those are all the pictures that I had.
Okay, yeah, that'll work.
Just for
so those are just some of the things that we do with practices with landowners, and there's a lot more that we do that we didn't bring the pictures of there, but just different things that we've got in our toolbox as an agency that we're helping landowners with different conservation practices to help threatened endangered species, help the waterways in our area, and one of the things I'm excited about, we worked with Jeronimo on a proposal called the Joint Chiefs proposal, where we just got through submitting that. And Joint Chiefs, it's the chief of NRCS, USDA-NRCS, and the chief of the Forest Service. And we write that proposal together, and the Forest Service gets funding to do conservation practices on the public land, and our agency would get funding to do conservation practices on the private land. And those two properties and lands and watersheds where all of that comes together, we're working together as a public-private, project and a public-private grant to address, the waters coming into the Forest Service or leaving the Forest Service, and trying to help conductivity and that kind of stuff. And so one of the practices I hope we're going to be able to use is aquatic organism passage and more of these buffers, and helping to slow down soil erosion, and kind of excited about that. Hopefully we'll get funding for that. But anyway, that's, I'll stop talking and rambling and see if we got anything that might have spurred up questions and go from there.
Yeah, the really cool thing, the really unique thing about the partnership between what we are doing and NRCS is that there are so many ongoing efforts to help in the conservation, and a lot of them have to do with research and captive breeding and reintroduction, and a lot of that also has been done, and most of the conservation efforts have been done in public lands. With NRCS, that's the first time that we have had the opportunity to actually do any conservation in private lands.
Yeah.
And that's what's so exciting about it. It's so unique about our
right.
partnership.
Yeah. And you know, we as an agency, a federal agency, are invited into the counties through the local soil conservation district. And those local soil conservation districts are made up of a board of 5 members. And those 5 members, you know, own property and have property and live there in the county. And so, you know, being a private land type situation, we're able to be there in counties working through those conservation districts as a federal agency, bringing our science and technology that we have through different scientists and things on how conservation practices work. And we have that technology of being able to conservation plan and to use those things to say, look, you know, we see these problems, we see things happening, and we've got funds available to help you as a landowner fix this stuff. You know, typically some of that stream bank stabilization work that you might have seen could cost, you know, some of those large ones, a couple of, yeah, you know, that some of those large projects right there, $100,000. You know, a small project right in there, if we're going to try to stop some of that soil erosion like that, you know, that whole big bend right there, you're typically looking at, you know, that's a 6-foot drop. You're typically looking at $12 or more a running foot. I mean, you might even be up into the $15 a running foot to stop some of that, you know. And so how does a landowner, when they've got a problem, fix that, you know, and how does that then in turn help P&Es and hellbenders and that kind of stuff? And that's what makes our agency, I think, great, is we're coming up and providing, you know, funds for people to do this type of work, to install conservation practices to help the natural resources. And that funding there being available is a way for landowners to do things that they wouldn't normally be able to do out of their own pocket.
Hey, Todd, we got a question here in the chat, and it says, do you do any work with conservation easements, or is that providence of other agencies? Is that a province of other agencies?
Yeah, my dog's barking in the background. You might hear him there. Yes, and different types of easements. We've got an easement program. It falls under not the one that we use the most of, but we do easements. Most of our easements in East Tennessee fall under wetland easements, where a landowner might have a wetland area that needs to be restored, and basically we'll go in and pay to restore that wetland, and then also pay to basically permanently keep it in the wetland. And they'll get an upfront payment to put it into a permanent easement to where, you know, it can still be used, but it can't be drained, or it can't be developed, or it can't, you know, it can't be, the use has to basically go through our agency and the conservation planning on, you know, what we can do with it. But but that's our typical easement in East Tennessee. We don't do a lot of easements, permanent type easements along creeks and streams. There is a different agency that does that. And we're not purchasing those creek easements and bank easements like that. Our practices, last a certain time period, 10, 20 years. And, whenever a landowner is doing those conservation contracts with us, then we manage it during that contract time period, but there's no permanent easement. And some of those contracts can last 5 years. But yeah, we're not doing easements along creeks and streams here.
So we had earlier today, we had a question about how to get involved. Benjamin had asked how to get involved with the initiative. So basically, I mean, there's several ways that you can get involved with the initiative, but the main way is reaching out to, and I'll put my contact information where you can get it through David or Todd. But usually, if you are a private landowner, even if you're not in agriculture, if you are just a urban private landowner, you can always get with the Soil and Water Conservation District through us. But there are, I think I have a map of the watersheds that we cover here. I should have a map. And basically, you reach out to us. We'll just chat with you, like Todd was saying, identify resource concerns that you may have in your land. And you'd be surprised. We work with a lot of things, but ponds. We do not work with ponds because we get calls all the time asking about ponds. But in general, there's a lot of things that we can help you with. So you get with us, we'll get a team and visit your farm or visit your property and talk about what's going on and if there are anything within our programs that we can offer to help you address some of those resource concerns. I focus mainly on aquatic resources. So I will deal with anything that has to do with streams or any landscape restoration that can impact streams. But in the team, we have lots of other people that work with terrestrial wildlife, wildlife management, cover crops, pollinators. I mean, the resources are endless with the team that we have. So that's how you get involved. And now there are other ways to get involved with outreach events. And I think the biggest thing with the best way that you really can go about getting involved in the initiative is just what you do on a personal level and the kind of interaction you have with the landscape on a personal level is really understanding the relationship that you have with the land and understanding that there are best management practices out there that can help you improve the productivity of the land without jeopardizing health of the land. And having that awareness, for example, let me get this out here.
Geronimo, I'll jump in while you're looking for that. We do have an Earth Team volunteer program where, if you individually would like to volunteer to do some time and stuff and do projects when we have different events and different things going on, you can be a part of that. And just as long as we're coordinating it, together. We hadn't been doing many events lately, but yeah, sure. Being involved in that Earth Team volunteer.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, we can do that too. And if anyone's interested in that, just get with either me or Geronimo, and we can give you some more information on how to do that.
We can post that on the Science Cafe page and cross link if you like to do that. This is normally about the time that I would ask our audience if there's any. I usually would call for a final question at this point. Does anybody? I'm watching the chat, and I don't hear anyone jumping in. Guys, I really want to thank you both very much for taking the time and doing this. It's good that I got a little bit more experience with Zoom when we were going to have the in-person session, and I'd still like to do this at some point. We were going to have the in-person session at a movie theater and basically project, the grid of everyone up on the board behind us, and you'd be able to show things on the movie theater screen, and people still be able to interact through the Zoom. But for the folks that were there, that'd be kind of interactive between the ones at home and the ones in person. But we had to cancel that, and then we have another meeting next month that'll be very similar to this with a speaker. She was actually got folks that live in Knoxville, but she lives in New Zealand. And so we were supposed to have her meeting in person as well, but the New Zealand airline company canceled all their flights from New Zealand to the U.S. So thankfully we can fall back on Zoom. So we'll get a little bit of experience there. But so this was a great way to go ahead and have this meeting. I would personally like to see us do it again when we can try to specifically, go to an area where basically where we can target people that are along the waterways, and we'll look for opportunities to do that. Now that I've seen the pictures and so on, it gives me a little bit better idea of what you're looking for there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thanks for having us. This was great. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day. It's great. I'm glad everyone got together, and thanks for the opportunity and for everyone attending.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well,
Me too.
I'll relay through a message out to our participants, and if there's a link to the video or anything you'd like to share with that group, I'll pass it along. And all right, well, I appreciate it, guys, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Y'all have a good night.
You too.